Okay, welcome back. In this chapter, chapter number 11, we will go over the cardiovascular system. Now, on average, the human heart will contract about 2.5 billion times in a person's lifetime. And of course, that will vary depending on a person's overall health and the age at which they live to. Some blood vessels we'll talk about are very large, some are quite small. Some carry blood under high pressure, some carry blood under very little pressure. So the heart plus all of the blood vessels together, those are what make up the cardiovascular system. So it's not just the heart, it is the heart plus the vessels. That's where the term cardiovascular comes from. Cardio references heart, vascular references blood vessels. First we'll start talking about the heart. The heart is a hollow cone-shaped organ made up of two pumps and has 4 chambers. The chambers that are on top are the atria. Atria is a plural. Singular would be atrium. So you have the right atrium, left atrium, and together they're referenced as the atria. And those are the receiving chambers, or for blood storage. And the chambers that are on the bottom are the ventricles. Right ventricle, left ventricle. And these are the actual pumping chambers. Now, of course, the heart will vary in size depending on the overall size of the person, but it's approximately about 14 centimeters long, about 9 centimeters wide. Its location is just behind and just posterior to the sternum, medial to the lungs, and it's just above the diaphragm. And you can see in this image, it really is more in the center of the chest as opposed to being over here. Here's how one would actually look if we were laying on the side on the table. There's various chambers here and various blood vessels here. We'll talk about these in a second. The heart is located within a membrane-bound sac called the pericardium. You can think of this almost like a plastic shopping bag that you get at a grocery store. Now, this pericardium is there to help limit the heart from overexpanding and also to limit the heart motion. And this is how it looks. See, the heart actually rests within a membrane-bound sac. That'd be the pericardium. See, the heart wall has 3 very distinct layers, and like everything we've talked about in this course, the prefixes help to tell you what kind of location you're talking about. The first one, epicardium, this is the outermost layer. Epi means above. Myocardium, this is the thick middle layer. This is actual muscle. The prefix myo is a reference to muscle, so that the thickest middle layer of the heart is the myocardium. And the innermost layer, the endocardium. Endo always means inside. These prefixes, epi, myo, endo, tell you the location of these tissue layers. If we're going to take a small section of the heart right here and zoom in on it here, see, this lining right here, the epicardium. The big bulk of the heart muscle itself, the myocardium. And then the innermost lining, the endocardium. Alright, next we'll talk about the chambers and the valves that are found in the heart. The upper chambers of the heart, the atria, are used to receive blood that's returning back to the heart. All blood in the body, doesn't matter if it's coming from the top of your head or the bottom of your feet, all blood goes back to the heart to the right atrium through one of 2 vessels, either the inferior vena cava or superior vena cava. And depending on where the blood is coming from will determine what vessel it uses. Inferior means below the heart, and superior would mean above the heart. Blood coming back to the heart that's found below the location of the heart, it's inferior to the heart, will return to the heart through the inferior vena cava. So basically from your middle of your chest down, so your abdomen, your pelvis, your legs, your feet, all that blood when it goes back to the heart will enter through the inferior vena cava. Structures that are above your heart, such as the upper part of your chest, your arms, your neck, your face, when that blood goes back to the heart, it enters the right atrium through the superior vena cava. Right, and then the left atrium will receive blood coming back from the pulmonary veins. We'll talk about that process in a second. This image we'll reference a few more times in this video. All blood, no matter where it comes from, will enter the heart through this chamber here, the right atrium. The right atrium is over here, left atrium is over here. Right ventricle here, left ventricle. So structures that are above the heart will return blood to the heart through this vessel, superior vena cava. Superior because it's above. And the structures below the heart will return its blood through the inferior vena cava here. I'll talk about the very important valves that are found in the heart. Now, valves are used as a way to prevent backflow of blood. So there's only one way to get into and out of the ventricles, are through these valves, because you never want blood going backwards. All right, the first one we'll talk about, the tricuspid valve. This is found between the right atrium and the right ventricle. This will consist of 3 leaflets or 3 flaps that open and close. The pulmonary valve, this is found between the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery. These also consist of 3 leaflets or 3 flaps that will open and close. The mitral valve, or the bicuspid valve, either term is fine here. This is found between the left atrium and the left ventricle. This is the only one of the valves that we'll talk about that has only 2 flaps. All the other ones have 3. So the mitral valve will have 2 flaps or 2 leaflets that open and close. And the last one, the aortic valve, found between the left ventricle and the aorta. This also consists of 3 flaps. And there are some very strong, very tough fiber strings that help control movement of these valves. They're called chordae tendineae. And these are found within the tricuspid and the mitral valves. So these would actually control the opening and closing of these flaps. If these flaps don't close at the same time, or if there's some delay in how they open and close, that's when you get blood going backwards. That's what causes a heart murmur. That's what you actually are hearing when you listen to a heart murmur, is blood going backwards. Now, some murmurs aren't a serious concern at all, but some are very, very serious. So going back to this image, tricuspid valve found between the right atrium, right ventricle. Pulmonary valve between the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery. Mitral valve found between the left atrium, left ventricle, and the aortic valve between the left ventricle and the aorta. This major artery here. Now, both the mitral and the tricuspid valves are also known by another name, the AV valves, the atrioventricular valves, all due to their location. They're found between an atrium and a ventricle. So that's how you get the AV valves. So you can just as easily call the tricuspid valve the right AV valve. You can call the mitral valve the left AV valve. So these terms are not incorrect, just another term to address the same structure. And the aortic and the pulmonary valves are also known as semilunar valves because of their leaflets have a half-moon shape to them. So the mitral and tricuspid valves are AV valves, and the aortic and pulmonary valves are semilunar valves. All right, here's an image of the heart from the superior view. Tricuspid valve here, and the 3 flaps here. The pulmonary valve here, the 3 flaps. Aortic, the 3 flaps here. And the only one that's odd of these 4, the mitral valve, only the 2 flaps. And you see the chordae tendineae, these little strings here. Now here's the illustration. Here's how it would actually look. So this image is exactly the same orientation as this illustration. The only difference is that's just the drawing, and that's real. So tricuspid valve here, pulmonary valve here, aortic valve here, and mitral valve here. And if you look closely, you can see the chordae tendineae right about here. You can kind of see it in this one, but it's kind of hidden in the shadow. But this and this are exactly the same thing. Alright, next we'll talk about circulatory pathways. And the body is divided into 2 very distinct circuits, the pulmonary circuit and the systemic circuit. And both of these reference where the blood is going throughout the body. The first one is the shortest, the pulmonary circuit. The term pulmonary is always a reference to the lungs. Right. In this circuit, you have oxygen-poor blood being pumped from the right ventricle of the heart to the lungs. We're going to actually pick up oxygen and then be returned to the heart going into the left atrium. And that's all that circuit does. It takes blood that doesn't have oxygen, it pumps it to the lungs to pick up oxygen, and then sends it back to the heart. So again, when you look at an image like this, anything that's in blue are vessels or locations that have blood that has no oxygen, and ones that are red are vessels or structures that have blood with oxygen. So all blood will come back here to the right atrium, goes through the tricuspid valve to the right ventricle. It's pumped out through the pulmonary valve, through the pulmonary arteries, to go to the lungs, pick up oxygen. It will come back through the pulmonary veins into the left atrium. That's all that circuit is. heart, lungs, and then back to the heart, and that's all. Alright, so everything else is called the systemic circuit. So this is what will provide functional blood supply that your tissues can use. So the blood that has oxygen that has just returned to the heart will be pumped from the left ventricle through the aorta and onto the rest of the body. So those are the two circuits that cover circulatory pathways in our body, either going from the heart to the lungs and then back, or going from the heart to everywhere else. And here are both of those kind of put together. So here you have the oxygen poor blood being pumped to the lungs, pick up oxygen, then go back to the heart. And from here, that blood that is now rich with oxygen is able to be used, is able to be functional for your cells and tissues, then is pumped through the rest of the body. And once that blood gets used, and it has more carbon dioxide than oxygen, it goes back to the heart for the cycle to start all again. So oxygen poor blood leaves the body's tissues, goes back to the heart, it gets pumped to the lungs to pick up oxygen, back to the heart, and out to the body. It's the same thing over and over and over again. Alright, next we'll talk about the heart action. Blood moves through the heart due to a very coordinated series of events. Things have to happen in a very sequential order for this to work properly. When some chambers are contracting, other chambers have to be relaxing. When some valves are open, other valves have to be closed. And this whole sequence of one heartbeat from beginning to end is called the cardiac cycle. And here are two terms that we'll talk about again toward the end of the video. Diastole and systole or systole. Diastole is reference to a chamber relaxing and filling the blood, and systole or systole is another term for a ventricle or a chamber contracting. So whenever you're taking a blood pressure, you're reading the systolic pressure over the diastolic pressure. So the pressure of the ventricles contracting over the pressure of the ventricle relaxing. Alright, we'll talk about the cardiac cycle. It's important to know the order of this event, or of these events. And there are several steps listed here on this slide and on the next one. If it helps, you might want to think of this as two sides of the heart as opposed to one organ as the heart. So this sequence will start as the blood has already been used by your body tissue and is now going back to the heart. Alright, that blood will enter the right atrium through the inferior or superior vena cava. It just depends on where it's coming from. Remember, all blood will enter the right atrium to start this process. That blood will pass through the tricuspid valve, entering the right ventricle. Blood is now pumped through the pulmonary valve, going through the pulmonary arteries. And then now blood will travel to the lungs to pick up oxygen. And I'll mention this now. Most people learn differences between arteries and veins. They usually learn that arteries carry blood with oxygen and veins carry blood without oxygen. And for the most part, that is true, except for one major exception. Those are the pulmonary vessels. It's actually backwards with those. So the better way to think of that, instead of thinking about what kind of blood is being carried by a vessel, it's easier to think of this as what direction the blood is going. All arteries carry blood away from the heart. All veins carry blood back to the heart, without exceptions. So for here, when blood is pumped through the pulmonary valve, it goes through the pulmonary arteries. It's leaving the heart, going away from the heart. So A for arteries, A for away. It's leaving the heart to go to the lungs. So don't focus on what type of blood is being carried. Think of the direction that the blood is going. Alright, that's the first part of this cardiac cycle. So now the blood has already been to the lungs and picked up oxygen, and now it's coming back. So that oxygenated blood will enter the left atrium, the pulmonary veins. Veins go back to the heart. So in this case, the pulmonary veins carry blood with oxygen. This blood will now pass through the mitral valve, entering the left ventricle. Blood is now pumped through the aortic valve, entering the aorta. And the blood will travel through the aorta and onto the rest of the body. The aorta will further branch off into other major vessels from there on. So going back to this image, blood enters the right atrium, the tricuspid valve, the right ventricle, pumped through the pulmonary valve, to enter the pulmonary arteries. There are right and left here, because they're right and left lungs. They go to the lungs, they pick up oxygen. It will come back to the pulmonary veins, left and right here, entering the left atrium, pass through the mitral valve, then to the left ventricle. This is the major pumping chamber of the heart. From here, it's pumped through the aortic valve, entering the aorta, and then from here, it goes on to the rest of your entire body. Now, here are some key items to remember when it comes to heart action. In a normal functioning heart, and when we go over all these details, we're talking about a normal, healthy, normally functioning heart. Both atria will do the same action as the other. So both will either be filling with blood at the same time, or they both will be releasing blood at the same time. The ventricles perform the same action as the other. So they're either both filling with blood, or they're both contracting blood, or pumping blood out. Tricuspid and mitral valves are going to be open or closed at exactly the same time as each other. And the aortic and pulmonary valves will be open and closed at the same time as each other. So this is why this is a very coordinated sequence of events. If some of these don't happen at the same time, then there's going to be some problems. Here's what I mean by that. So for here in diastole, where the ventricles are filling with blood, for that to happen, the AV valves need to be open. So the mitral valve here and the tricuspid valve are going to be open, while these chambers are relaxed, filling with blood. When these valves are open, the other two are going to be closed. So in order for these to fill with blood, the atria are going to be releasing blood. The ventricles are doing the same thing, the AV valves are doing the same thing, and the atria are doing the same thing. Now in systole, as these ventricles are contracting, that pressure of them contracting will push open the aortic valve and the pulmonary valves. So when that happens, the AV valves are going to be closed. Tricuspid will slam shut, and the mitral valve will slam shut. Okay, so again, both ventricles are doing the same thing at the same time. The AV valves are doing the same thing at the same time. The semilunar valves are doing the same thing at the same time. And the atria are doing the same thing at the same time. And this has to happen in order for this cardiac cycle to be effective. You don't want one ventricle to be contracting and the other one not, or one AV valve open and the other AV valve closed. You don't want that to happen. Alright, next we'll talk briefly on cardiac conduction. The heartbeat is triggered by an electrical impulse that's carried out by action potentials. And this can be measured easily by an EKG, electrocardiogram. Now, even though it is an action potential and you are recording an electrical impulse, the heartbeat is actually generated by a very specialized type of cardiac tissue. It's not nervous tissue, it's still a very modified cardiac tissue. And it all originates from a small mass in the heart, in the right atrium, called that sinoatrial node, SA node. This is your body's natural pacemaker. Okay, and here's where it is, right up here, SA node. And again, this is another function of the heart that must go in a very coordinated manner. The impulse has to start here, and then go to here, and so on. Alright, next we'll talk about various types of blood vessels. All arteries, these will carry blood away from the ventricles. A for artery, A for away. Smaller arteries are called arterioles. These are what will connect arteries to capillaries as they get smaller and smaller. Capillaries, these are what join the very small arteries, the arterioles, the very small veins, the venules. And this is the site of exchange of material between blood and the tissues. These are only 1 cell thick, so this is where you're going to have a lot of the diffusion happen. Venules will receive blood from the capillaries, and the veins are what will carry blood back toward the atria of the heart. Here's a graphic that shows how structurally these are different, arteries versus veins. We'll talk about some of the differences here next, but this looks completely different than this would. And as you get smaller, you get to arterioles, and capillaries that are the joining vessel. The small veins are called venules, and then veins, and then back to the atria of the heart. All right, arteries have a very thick, very strong middle layer because they carry blood under high pressure. They're made up of a special type of connective tissue that allows them to maintain their strength even though the blood's being pumped under high pressure. So it enables, this elastic tissue allows them to expand and then go back to normal. And if this middle layer of elastic tissue gets weakened or breaks down over time, that's when you have an aneurysm. Because the blood's being pumped under high pressure, if the walls can't contain that blood being pumped, the vessel will just rip itself open, like overfilling a water balloon. It can only carry so much. And when the pressure gets too high, the vessel ruptures, and then that's what an aneurysm actually is. Now, due to this thick, strong middle layer in this vessel, they have a smaller area, inner space, called the lumen. So they have a lot more strength in veins, but what they make up for in strength, they lose in the amount of space that they can carry blood. in the lumen. Capillaries, the smallest diameter of all the blood vessels. Like I mentioned, they're about one cell thick. They connect the smallest arteriole to the smallest venules. And these are really just nothing more than extensions of the inner lining of arterioles. Alright, here's a picture of all those. You have arterioles here in red, and the venules that are in blue. And these little things that look almost purplish, because you're mixing red and blue, are the capillaries. They're connecting these to these. Veins, these have much thinner walls compared to arteries, because they don't carry blood under high pressure. Whenever blood leaves the heart, it's under very, very high pressure, but then the further it travels, the pressure gets less and less and less. So by the time it gets to veins, you don't really need that strong middle lining, because that pressure just isn't there like it is in arteries. Many veins have flap-like valves in them to prevent backflow of blood. And like I said, they carry blood under relatively low pressure. And because they don't need to have that strong, thick middle lining of elastic tissue, they have a much more open space to carry blood, so a much larger lumen compared to arteries. Here's an example of both of those. This is an artery. This is a vein. So the arterial wall, you can see very distinctly this thick middle layer of that elastic connective tissue. But because this wall is so much thicker compared to the vein wall, they have a much smaller inner space to carry blood, so the lumen is smaller. So thicker wall, stronger, but smaller lumen. And then the vein, because it has blood under such low pressure, you don't need this thick wall, so you have a much larger space, much larger lumen. So vein, arteries. Alright, next we'll talk about blood pressure. Now the blood pressure is the force of the blood that is exerted against the inner walls of the blood vessels. And it's usually referred to pressure in the systemic arteries. So arterial blood pressure, it will rise when the ventricles contract and then fall as the ventricles are relaxing and filling with blood. And something that we mentioned earlier, systolic pressure and diastolic pressure. Systolic pressure is the maximum pressure during ventricular contraction, and then the diastolic pressure is the minimum pressure when the ventricles relax. So if you are taking a blood pressure manually with a stethoscope, that last sound that you're able to hear before the sound kind of fades away, that would be the diastolic pressure. Alright, here's some common places where pressure can be taken or a pulse can be taken. The temporal artery here by the temples, facial, carotid in the neck, brachial, which is why you get your blood pressure taken usually right here, radial in the wrist, femoral, inner thigh, popliteal right behind the knee, and the posterior tibial artery, back of the leg here, and on top of the foot, dorsalis pedis. Alright, some factors that affect blood pressure. The first one we'll talk about is cardiac output, or CO. This is the volume of blood per minute that the heart pumps. So this is determined by the heart rate multiplied by the amount of blood that's pumped out of the ventricles each heartbeat. That is called the stroke volume. So the volume of blood that's pumped out every beat is stroke volume. So that amount multiplied by the amount of times your heart beats in 1 minute will give you the cardiac output. Now blood pressure is proportional to cardiac output, which just makes sense. If your heart is beating harder and more often, the cardiac output will also be higher. So if one goes up, the other one goes up. If one goes down, the other one goes down. Next we'll talk about the venous blood flow. As I mentioned earlier, the pressure that the blood is under gets less and less as it travels throughout the body. So by the time it gets to the veins, it's under relatively low pressure. So the blood that are in the veins needs help getting back to the heart. It can't travel enough on its own because it's lost so much energy at that point. So it's going to rely on other factors such as skeletal muscle contracting around the veins, pushing blood forward, and also the respiratory movements of your lungs. See, this is a vein going back to the heart here, and you can see the valves here. As these skeletal muscles constrict or contract around it, they are squeezing the blood here back to the heart. So this is what is needed for most veins to get blood back to the heart. This is why if someone were to stand perfectly still, say at attention, for example, if you don't have a natural sway to your body and you stand perfectly still, blood will just pool in your feet and in your lower legs and you will pass out. So that's why you need to have a natural kind of swaying motion to your body whenever you're standing still to help these muscles contract and to push blood back to the heart. because if that doesn't happen, you're going to pass out. Alright, that brings us to the end of this chapter on the cardiovascular system. Of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me.